Welcome to Talk with Me. This is Marcia Epstein in Lawrence, Kansas. It's hard to believe that is August 1st, 2016 when we're recording. And if you're listening to this show premiere, it's Tuesday, August 2nd. How did that happen? Who knows? I'm in a university community, so that means all kinds of things start changing in a couple of weeks. It means people have been moving from place to place within this community. As I say, sometimes, unfortunately, it's moving from a worse place to a bad place. Sometimes it's moving from a worse place to a good place. It kind of depends on people's resources. We see couches and mattresses and piles of stuff that people are leaving behind. And then some people who are going through and finding some treasures, It's an interesting time, moving time of year in a university community. I love that we have different things going on. It's an influx of new people, every year in a university community like this. There are people that are coming in for their work or their schooling. There's this excitement, there's energizing, there are lots of cool event things that always happen around here. And some of them go on a little bit of a hiatus in the summer, so we'll get to have even more excitement coming up. We have a couple of regular poetry events here and other kinds of arts. Lawrence is a community with so many wonderful artists, not so much financial support for the art, but then again, unfortunately, in Kansas, there's not much financial support for a lot of things. Anyway, today is one of those fun shows where through the thises and that's of the interwebs, we get to meet some folks from the Houston, Texas area, people who are writers and also have a small artisan press. I love that. I love that there are so many opportunities for people. And so I want to just introduce my guests. I will confess from the get-go, everybody involved with creating this show today is in a different location. So we're going to have to figure out our timing just a bit. But I'm going to welcome two guests, and I'll ask one of them to start first. So I'm going to welcome our two guests, who are Dustin Pickering and ZM Wise, and they are with Transcendent Zero Press and the poetry journal Harbinger Asylum. And hey, I want to ask ZM, tell us a little bit about you. Let's hear a little bit about you, and then we'll get to Dustin. We're going to do our best not to all be talking at the same time because we want to hear what you each have to say. So welcome.
Thank you very much for having us today, Marcia.
You're welcome.
Yes, I'm ZM Wise. I've been with Transcendent Zero Press now for almost 5 years now. I first met Dustin back in 2010 at a few local readings, and he noticed the same unbridled passion that I had for poetry, and we eventually hit it off and sort of took me under his wing and taught me the ways of a poet.
That's a little scary, ZM.
Oh goodness gracious, great balls of fire! He showed me Harbinger Asylum. He gave me a copy, and I was immediately interested. And I, back at the time, it was the magazine was very local, and I had been performing at a few local readings here and there, just trying to get my work out there. Because as this wise poet once told me, if you want people to eventually read your work, they have to hear you. I'm like, that's a very interesting take on it. It's a very interesting take on it. Back in the day, people like T.S. Eliot and people way before him, after dinner parties, the entertainment was the poet. There was no television or Xbox or anything like that. But Dustin taught me about Harbinger Asylum, taught me about his writing style. I was immediately entranced by his work. There's nothing like it. And then he told me about this idea he had about forming Transcendent Zero Press, and eventually we became a business tax documents and all. um, and it's been thriving ever since. And once Dustin tells you the origin of the name, it's a pretty interesting story. But yeah, and yeah, poetry for me, it's not what I do for a living. It's what I do in order to survive. I was telling Dustin last night, poetry and writing to me, it's like an eternity of servitude, but it's the type that you want to do. I'm a slave to the craft, but I love it. It's what I truly live for. It's how I breathe. It's what I eat. It's what I sleep every single day. And whether I'm reading it, writing it, quoting it, or whatnot, it's just overall, it's a miracle to me, and I'm glad I possess that gift. My work isn't golden or anything, but it's a genuine pleasure to just be involved in this.
That's lovely. Thanks. And Dustin, are you going to top that?
Yes, I mean, I would like to kind of highlight, and go forward with some of what ZM said. Transcendent Zero Press, I was about 16 years old when I came up with the title Transcendent Zero. And the way I made this happen was I was a fan of reading the dictionary, and I found the word transcendental. And on top of that, at the time, there was a song on the radio called Zero by Smashing Pumpkins. And so I put two and two together, and I got four. And I was going to make basically a punk band with that title. It never happened because I'm musically inadept. Not even adept enough to create a punk band. But I basically took that name when I got, to the point where we were making an actual publishing press rather than just a journal. I took that title because it sounded like, it had a backstory. It's kind of a concept, and this is what I say. We've elaborated on some of the history of publishing because Knopf was they were brand naming publishing, and we took the brand name idea and made it into a concept. Because Transcendent Zero is actually, it's a mystical kind of concept where you are united with, the great beyond, and you transcend yourself at the same time. You're into this kind of subliminal nothingness. It's kind of like a oneness with nature, and that's part of the concept, and it's also a sort of idea of looking beyond oneself and seeing the wholeness of reality, and kind of looking at the heart of existence and seeing that I think at the core what people call God is actually a force that is core absolutely nothing. And there's a statement made by the early scientist Democritus where he says nothing is more real than nothing. And I kind of, when I first read that, I think I read it in Samuel Beckett, and I thought, that's really interesting, and I really thought about it, and it dwelled on me, and I decided that's probably the case, I think that's, when you go far back enough and you break things down into their molecules and then their atoms, and you go, deeper and deeper through the quantum levels of existence, you probably wind up with nothing because it gets smaller and smaller, and that's basically what infinity is. But at the root level, it's nothing. So that was kind of the concept we devised for the press. As far as the journal, Harbinger Asylum, that was an accident because, my friend Alex and myself were, Alex is also, he's our political columnist. We were talking, and basically, he said, I really like the word Harbinger, and I said, well, let's do Harbinger Asylum. And then I developed an idea of what that could be. Like a harbinger is a carrier of a bad message, or something in the future is coming up and it's bad. It's an omen. There's an omen. And then there's asylum, which means two things, which is asylum you go to if you're crazy, or an asylum in the sense of like political asylum, like granting someone you can come into my country, we'll protect you kind of asylum.
Safety,
so it's kind of like, saying that messenger, which I really did after a while develop this, is a concept to where asylum is meaning, it's implying that the harbinger is perceived as a lunatic and needs to be protected. And so the harbinger, is actually, sort of the poet himself or the artist himself is prophet.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally have
You mean it with all the kind of love, right, though?
Right.
Exactly. We only mean this in the nicest possible way.
Well, I mean, I think, people who have a lot of these, disabilities and things, I've been around people like that, and they're very interesting. They're usually very creative in a way that other people don't have the capacity. They think way outside the box, So, I mean, it's very nice it's actually a compliment in some ways to say, that's crazy. People say that. I'm like, everything's crazy. The world's weird, But that's kind of my...
Yeah, this is a strange time. So you mentioned that at 16 you came up with this title, and I'm wondering, at what point did you start writing poetry?
Well, the first thing I actually wrote was I was in first grade, and I wrote a thing called The Little Red Wagon, which was actually a kind of children's story I put together. It inspired my teacher to require that all the other students in my class do their own books that's similar, because my aunt actually put it together as an actual book. But I've been writing and doing artistic things for a long time, and my grandmother said that when I was very young, I wanted to be a shark hunter, and then as time went on, my thing was artist, and that was very young, probably 7, 8 years old. I decided I wanted to be an artist. And artist is a broad term. It's not just painting or photography. It's very broad, and that's kind of, I wanted to be a multidisciplinary artist. So I play guitar, I write, I do painting and visual art.
Nice.
It's my life, and that's pretty much what I do. But as far as writing specifically, I think that's where it probably started. And I consider poetry to be the heart of all artistic things, because it's an analogy. It's making an analogy, and that making of an analogy is what creates, the tension that makes a new thing come to life. And so I think even in paintings, you're making a poem of the paints. You're painting a concept or a specific symbolic representation of something, whether it's emotions or maybe a social commentary, things of that nature.
Yeah, I have a friend who is based here in Lawrence, Kansas, who is a muralist whose work is international. He's not just a Lawrence, Kansas guy doing Lawrence, Kansas things. His name's Dave Lowenstein, and Dave used the phrase that murals are visual poetry, which totally is, what you're saying. And I love that there are all these different types of art, and they're very complementary, and often they work together literally. Like here in Lawrence, we have this organization, and Dave happens to be the head of the local part of it, called the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, which is a people's movement. It's not a federal government thing. And we had a series of events called Artists Heating Up around climate change. And there were performances that were in spaces where the art displayed was art painted by people with different themes related to climate change. And poetry was read and danced out as well as read in this space with this, so you had words and dance and 2D paintings all about climate change, all different versions of the messages, but I really believe in the power of art for people to experience new and think about things in different ways that they wouldn't think about if you just said, "Hey, read this article." It's very powerful about connecting and expressing.
I think because it appeals directly to the emotions and to the more sensibilities of a person, rather than trying to be, direct, concrete fact, and here's the logic of this and analytical, and because that's really just dry and boring. It's not how people really are, essentially, because if you can appeal to a person's heart with something that is also intellectual in nature, then that's what art is. I mean, you're communicating a specific type of message, or it may just be that you're saying, this is what I feel about this, or this is what I'm seeing in the world today. A variety of things. But I think at heart, all art is a emotional thing that also appeals to the mind.
Mm-hmm. Ziam, how does that work? Ziam, how does that work for you? Like, how do you think about your own writing?
Oh boy. Well, I will tell you. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing for me. I started out when I was extremely young and wrote a few stories here and there. I think actually the first thing I ever wrote was actually called "Being Born." It was a first grader's perception of entering this world, and sort of turn those into poems. I tell people to save everything. I know plenty of people either incinerate or shred their work. I tell them it's a huge mistake, though, because what it is, it's evolution. It can and it can be anything you wish. It can either be an upward prism or a downward spiral. It's completely up to you. But I tell people, save everything. That's what I've done, and I've seen it as I mean, for me personally, I think it's been an upward prism, just branching out. I've been heavily inspired by art, mythology, love, nature, sex, war, everything in between, plenty of things I haven't mentioned. It's whatever truly seems inspiring to me. And for me, I think the muse is promiscuous. I'm inspired by so many things. It's insane. And to sort of reinstate and enhance what Dustin was saying about art, that's what I believe. Whenever I enter a gallery or a museum, and all, that's what I see when I look at either a mural, a painting, a sketch, a sculpture, or anything else. Visual art, I appreciate it. I admire it. I love interpreting it. And like Dustin was saying, it is a visual poem. Every single time I look at it, and I go for the more abstract pieces. That's what I prefer to look at, and of course the arts they're meant to be subjective. So I love coming up with my own meaning.
Me too.
It's what I love, and when it comes to my own writing, I when certain people ask me, what does this piece mean, I always say the same thing. I'm like, make up your own meaning, and that is what it's going to mean. If I tell you, it could ruin the significance of it, and your meaning very well be more significant than my own. I'm the person who holds the pen. I may be the creator, but in the end, it's completely up to you, the reader.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think, they talk about art and beauty, and aesthetics is a pursuit of what is beautiful or how do we know it's beautiful. And I kind of think that when you look at something beautiful, it's a unification of your senses. Like your whole mental apparatus reacts to this enveloping kind of light that comes from this beautiful object of either the human mind. It could just be someone's face. You may just fall in love with someone because, for some reason they just have an appeal to you. And, the brain acts on that, and the mind and the senses, perceive things. I think that that art is intended to communicate to the whole person rather than try to specifically, like some analytical types of thinking do, appeal straight to different aspects of this particular question. It can just pull all those questions together and hit you directly in the eye and make you think, because there's so many interpretations of any individual artwork. I can look at something and come up with 5 or 6 different meanings. It could be potential, but at the same time, someone else is looking at it thinking of something else, So it's a way of you're living through your own questions about life, and you're approaching, possibly reliving experiences that you've had and reinterpreting. And it's a beautiful experience.
It really is. I'd like to make a little comment on that. Speaking of which, there's this form of poetry that I was introduced to a few years ago called ekphrastic poetry.
Yes.
Since we're speaking about art, and
Yes.
to me, it's one of the most beautiful, underrated forms of poetry, and it's sort of a way that poets bounce off certain energies of artists, and vice versa.
Zian, for people who don't know what that is, will you explain?
Yes, of course. With ekphrastic poetry, it's pretty much your, from what I've learned anyway, it's your specific and poetic interpretation of a certain artistic piece, and it doesn't. It's usually visual art, but it could also be a film or a song or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And there's this poet who introduced it to me. Her name is Vanessa Zimmer Powell, and she specializes in ekphrastic poetry. And what you do is, after looking over a piece for a certain time, you create your own meaning. And there are certain classes, there are certain courses you can take that are related to that. And after writing it, it's your own poetic interpretation of that piece. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I find it interesting how people can perceive the same thing and see radically different things, and it's probably, I think, rooted in that person's experience in life. And I feel that life itself, to use a broad metaphor, is God's art, and nature is God's expression. And, to some degree, I think that when an artist is painting or writing, it's an imitation of nature. So you're kind of like playing God in your own sphere, and imitating, the creator in creating yourself. And that's what, I think most humans that I've met, most people, they enjoy, creating something new with their hands, even if it's, sculpting or building a car motor or whatever. It's all forms of creation. So I think a lot of people out there, even if they're not necessarily bookish or, museum gatherers or whatever, they do enjoy the act of taking something and making it anew.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
it's sort of a tribute, sort of upholding the tradition, sort of keeping that piece alive as if the artists themselves never passed.
Yeah.
Well, it does say in the beginning of the New Testament, in the beginning was the Word, so we're back to where poetry is the primary thing.
Look who became a priest.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I want to
What my
invite
thoughts?
you. I want to invite you each to share some of your writing. You're both telling us some of your philosophy, your heart about art. How about hearing from Dustin one of your own poems, and then ZM after that?
Of
I
course.
recently had a small chapbook published by Chitranji in India, and the goal was to write poems under 10 lines and 25 poems. And the guy that was the publisher, I said, "What subject do you want me to approach?" And he said, "He wants me to bring out the God of the Bible," which I'm kind of like, "Okay, how do I do that?" But I did attempt this, and this was published, and it's called Salt and Sorrow. The poem I'm going to read is called Adam's Lament, and it's a reflection of Adam looking at Eve, and instead of the sort of, backwoods tradition of I dominate my wife, this is more like he's looking at Eve and seeing how she's also, a fragment of God as he is. Anyway, it's Adam's Lament. I know I am part of you, and she is part of me. Glory is for us together. Yet how does she express glory who has come from my rib? After all, I am incomplete. She too must be your light. Her beauty is a testament to it.
Lovely.
Lovely.
So, ZM, how about something from you before we take this break?
It would be an honor, Marcia. Let me see here. Okay. Okay. Well, I was trying to decide in between two. I'll pick this one for now. I recently finished writing a book of 80 Illinois poems. I'm currently in the process of finding a publisher in Illinois to publish it, but it's pretty much a tribute to the state I was from, and it's really funny. After living in Texas for so long, and I see so many people with Texas pride, and a certain part of me loves that, and it just inspired me to be even more proud where I was from.
Nice, nice.
And so this one, there's not exactly a specific mention of the state of Illinois, but it has, I guess you could say, sort of Midwestern feel. And for people who know me, I am a bit of a sap, an old-fashioned hopeless romantic and whatnot. And this one specifically, it's a bit of a love story in of itself, and it's my grandfather who taught me humor is one of our greatest allies.
Yes.
Even during some of the darkest times of your life, all you can do is laugh, and I've carried that with me for decades now. Yeah. And this poem is called Laugh, and it was published in Sick Lit magazine. Laugh, laugh, snicker. Got humor, have jokes, will travel. Humor, my greatest ally. I make love to you every day, burying my voice in your euphoric environment, echoing our barbaric ha-ha tones, a lullaby of chuckles sent to my loved one. She deserves this after a lifetime of killing tears, lusting after anger suppression, staring at the cobblestone floor. In this one humane body, a laugh attack is necessary. Bittersweet and demented, a quip that is corny. Who cares about the rule of thumb, the total number of guffaws? Losing it alongside you. It feels like I have ingested a carton full of uppers with kicks of caffeine. We are two hyenas without obligatory cares in this world, two saplings who evolve into a serene, elated green. Until death's alarm clock rang, we collected certain seconds. When her celebratory funeral occurred on a blackened evening, we laughed. End poem.
That's really touching, and it really resonates for me, who the smart aleck who's known to say, "Without laughter, we explode, and that's just not pretty."
How right you are.
Correct.
Hey, we need to take a little break here. I'm so glad to hear from both of you in terms of about poetry and hearing some of your poetry. Not to say that one piece defines either of you, but I love that we could get to that, and hopefully we'll get to another poem from each of you before we end this hour. And right now, we will hear from a couple Lawrence, Kansas businesses that bring lawrencehits.com. And I always thank Daniel Smith, who is the magical producer of the show, because from my perspective, all this technology stuff is magic. I just want it to work. I don't care how it works. I don't need to know the logistics, all that stuff, the ones and zeros and whatever it is, pluses and minuses. All I know is that Daniel does a magnificent job, and I really appreciate his help. Thank you, Daniel. And then we will be back in just a minute with more Talk with Me with today's guests, Dustin Pickering and ZM Wise, from the journal Harbinger Asylum, and from the press I'm not speaking very well. Sorry. Transcendent Zero. Got it. Thanks. Welcome back to Talk with Me. This is Marcia Epstein, and today my guests are ZM Wise and Dustin Pickering. They produce a journal that is called Harbinger Asylum, and they have a press called Transcendent Zero, and they write. They aren't just publishers, they write, and they are doing all these cool things. And we just heard a little bit of poetry from each of you. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, so if people want to find your poetry at this point, Dustin, what are some of the places to find your work that you are writing?
My poetry, the traditional way is you can go to Amazon. I have 2 self-published books and one from Chitranji, which is the poem I just read was in this book called Salt and Sorrow. I have another one that was my first self-published collection called The Daunting Ephemeral, and I have a second one called The Future of Poetry is Now, Bones Picking at Death's Howl. And that was going to be, or is going to be, probably a trilogy, because I spent I think it was my 32nd birthday, around that week, I wrote an entire notebook of poetry.
Wow.
And I took that notebook, and I started putting together book, didn't take anything out, didn't change anything, just uncensored, unchanged poetry from that notebook, and I put it into this book, and it's a pretty good sized little notebook, and it's probably going to be another couple of books eventually from that. That'll be a trilogy, a part of a series, and you can also check our website at www.transcendentzeropress.org, and I do have some pieces of mine on that website, and we also have the archives that contain some of the poetry we've published.
All right. How about you, Ziam?
You talking to me? No, I'm kidding. Yes.
Oh, just shut up. I don't want to talk to you anymore. You're done.
Goodbye.
Oh, no. I've been banished. No.
Relegated to the dustbin.
No. Well, first, I'd like to say, again, thank you so much for having us. And of course, Transcendent Zero Press is still thriving. We haven't been depressed yet. No, goodness.
Or suppressed.
Yeah, took 10 seconds to plan that one. As far as my books are concerned, my first book was called Take Me Back, Kingswood Clock. Sort of the title itself is sort of a tribute to one of the streets I grew up on when I was living in Illinois. That was published by Mavlit Press. And then TZ Press actually published one of my own called The Wandering Poet. That was my second book. And then I published one of my, it was actually the first epic poem I wrote, and it's called Wolf. and that's actually published by Weasel Press, which is also near Houston, Texas. It's in this place called Manville, Texas.
Okay.
And
I think
check
I
out
talked
Weasel.
to somebody else
I'm
who's
sorry?
on Weasel. I think I've talked to somebody else who's on Weasel Press. Interesting. Okay.
You very well might have. They're quite well known, quite the press. And then finally, there's this book-long confessional poem that I wrote called Cuentos de Amor, which in English it translates to The Love Accounts, and that was published by Red Ferret Press, sort of a subsection of Weasel Press.
I'm laughing at weasels. Yeah, weasels and ferrets.
Right.
But many of my individual pieces have been published in many journals and anthologies around, a couple in the UK. There's this place in India called Kritya. I've had a couple of poems published there, a few early drafts, and then just many around the country, just branching out as much as possible. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm also published in a variety of journals and online, sites. The Tower Journal, Cavalcade of Stars, places like that. There's pretty good variety. I'm actually featured on.
Indeed.
Yeah. And so, tell me about the Poetry Journal, Harbinger Asylum. What, I know that you have been nominated for awards for this, and tell us a little bit about it and how people can connect with it.
We were nominated in 2013 for a National Poetry Award, which is they're kind of democratic in organization. Anyone can nominate in a variety of categories. And somehow, it was just out of the blue, I got a letter from them on our site that said we had been nominated, we had, gone through the final process, and we were officially on the ballot. And so we put a run for the money on the other journal who beat us. We were second to them, and they were called Spoken Visions. As far as getting in touch with us, I have a email from the Transcendent Zero email.
Mm-hmm.
It's editor@transcendentzeropress.org. If you look on our site, which is www.transcendentzeropress.org, there's a pretty good set of things such as the YouTube channel where we do little interviews with ourselves, and also there's the information on how to subscribe to the journal.
Great.
And how to submit to the journal. We've published worldwide. We're talking anyone from Tunisia to Baltimore. All across the world, people have submitted. I had a guy out in I think it was China, maybe somewhere in the Orient, over there to the east. But we've had a variety of people from all over and different forms of poetry. I tend to like poetry that's not bordering on nihilism or senseless violence, graphic content.
Okay.
I just see that as fruitless. I like poetry that philosophizes, that says something to a person that transcends the kind of the person writing it, maybe says something universal. I guess I'm kind of a poetry elitist in some respects. But I do like poetry, and I know Zach does as well. That speaks to the reader as much as it speaks from the speaker of the the narrator of the poem.
Yeah.
I love poetry that talks about the nature of love, or if it's social or political, I tend to like it when it's not partisan, like, go vote Democrat or go vote Republican. It says something about society, the society we live in, or the person who's writing it lives in. It speaks to the condition, the human condition. That's my ultimate thing, is to, read something that speaks about the human condition in some form, or, as I describe some of our poetry that I look at is mystical in nature. I'm both kind of this revolutionary / mystic, kind of have the same sort of, personality as someone who's, both an upstart as well as a, healer personality. So I that appeals to me, those kinds of forms. And I do like formal poetry. I don't, I'm not going to be bigoted against someone writing informal or, loose verse or anything. I'm not too picky about the type of poetry. I do like I said, meaningful poetry. Mm-hmm. A lot of the postmodern and all that, I know it's got its thing, but it's not really what I'm into, and I'm, that's pretty much my main focus.
Mm-hmm. I do think there's a little tinge of irony here when you started out by saying you're not looking for the poetry that's nihilistic, but the name Transcendent Zero was supposed to be for your punk band.
Yes, I see that is a very ironic thing. I do love punk rock, but when it comes to poetry, I don't see a lot of the attitudes of punk translating well into a literary format. There is a poet that we hear from frequently. He lives in Los Angeles, and he's involved in the punk scene in L.A. And he writes some wonderful poetry. And he has one that he wrote about this. I can't remember the name. It was one of the generals in the fight between Liberia and Sierra Leone. And he wrote about this particular character, this guy, and it was called The Devil Carries an M16, I think. And, he writes some wonderful poetry, and it's very experimental looking, it's a very nice poetry. And he's, big, like I said, big in the punk scene out there. But I mean, when it comes to nihilism, I mean, I think that, if you think life is meaningless, then why are you living it? It has to have some kind of meaning, for you to continue forward. I mean, there's a quest for meaning that people have. Even nihilism itself is a meaning that you're ascribing to the world, But, I'm not into senseless violence, gratuitous sexual content, unless it's erotic, things like that.
Yeah.
So,
hey, I want to ask you to go ahead and name that poet you were referring to.
I believe his name is Jake Tringali.
Okay, and I want to introduce you both. And I know this was you, Dustin, talking about this, but when we talk about punk and poetry, what I find is there's some pretty powerful life-affirming poetry that is probably considered punk poetry. And to take a stab at somebody who you may not already know, Wolfgang Karstens, who's in Alberta, Canada, he has a press, Epic Rights Press, Tree Killer Inc. Check out what he and his crew are doing, because Wolfgang, I adore him, and his stuff is harsh. The illustrator he works with is really kind of hard for me, but the message is live every day to the fullest. You don't know how many days you have, so do those things.
Right. We had a poet. The first poet we published, her full collection, her name was Marcia Epstein, and that was the exact phrase she used in her first book, live life to its fullest. It was called Passion Zest. And she passed away last year in September at age 53. And we were very proud to have brought her aboard. And she actually told me at one point that there was a period where she was very close to just giving in and not writing. And she was very sick physically. And she said that I kept bugging her to write more poetry, and I didn't know she was sick. And she kept saying, I kept coming to her and saying, can you submit something? Can you submit something? And, she would write. And she said that got her through for the next few years in writing her poetry. And she said her doctors could tell when she was writing because she would just beam, And I can say that's true of any real poet is that they just light up when they're writing, and they're, you're putting your sunshine out there, know.
Yeah. Hey, I want to share, because as I said, I adore Wolfgang, and I'm going to share one of his short poems, and I think that ZM in particular will like this.
Ooh.
When Sammy was diagnosed with bone cancer and they amputated his left arm, he took it rather well. In fact, his only real complaint was being out the $400 he spent on the tattoo.
Funny.
Oh goodness! Wow.
A little humor in the worst situation.
So wow. So that person really went out on a limb, huh?
Ooh, yeah.
Oh yikes! I should. Wow.
No, that was wonderful.
It's a pun from a poet.
Yes.
He's pontificating. He's pontificating in the penitentiary.
Yeah, I certainly belong in the penitentiary, is what I've heard. Yeah.
No pun intended. No pun intended.
Yes.
He's the pontiff.
Yes, and see, I imagine that you and I also have this thing in common, where for me, it's also about the way when I look at things, I notice them in different ways, not just words, but also I might be staring up at the clouds and those shapes that I see. Or one of my favorites is as I would walk to the location where the radio office used to be, there was this certain, I don't even know exactly what it was, some kind of water meter plumbing pipe thing. But at each day as I walked towards the door of the radio office and I would look at this thing, to me, the shape was this little guy with his newspaper and his bicycle, It's like, hey, dude, how you doing this morning? I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I see patterns in the leaves of trees and the way the light goes through them and stuff like that. Or I see them in the tile of my bathroom, looking at that, and it's like it forms a face or something.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, there are these tiles in my shower, and a lot of them either look like faces or certain creatures. And a part of me is saying, this could be a great piece for writing, and the other part of me looks at it and says, Zach, you need to stop having arguments with yourself.
And I was thinking, another part says, it's time to take the bleach and get rid of the mildew.
Right.
It's time for a clean slate.
Exactly.
Wipe it clean.
Oh. Yeah.
Hey, are you each prepared
Scrub left, strip white.
Yeah. Are you each prepared to share another poem?
We are.
I'll let ZM go first.
Okay.
Oh, you shouldn't have. I'm sorry. I paid him to say that. No. Let me see here. All right. Well.
You owe me $60, Zach.
Okay. Hey. Nothing great about talking about finances over the air. Okay.
Finances and dead names. This is ZM, Dustin. What do you think?
Okay. Well, this is one of my more mystical poems, and at the same time, it is sort of a tribute. It's called Through Her Warrior Eyes. And a part of it, normally I don't speak about the meanings, but this is a special occasion. This is sort of a tribute to the women out there who are battling any sort of illness, whether it's cancer or any sort of mortal disease. And again, it's called Through Her Warrior Eyes. She sees victory. She sees evil being vanquished. Through her warrior eyes, all that seems improbable will be accomplished within a matter of seconds. As the faithless blindly walk on the desolate, scribbled path of indecisiveness, she gift-wraps the power to believe, hands it to them, then rides on, leaving behind a trail of inspiration. Those who do not doubt will see its glow. Its glow stretches far beyond any rainbow, penetrating the nearest body of water. She converses at times with the Lady of the Lake, but she does not need Excalibur to conquer this war of the century. Through a golden heart and strength of steel, she will crush this faithless enemy single-handedly, defeating every sneak attack and ruthless comeback without breaking a single drop of perspiration. The supremacy of love is on her side. The commanding call is spoken through her words. Give it hell and do not give it a moment's thought. To the populace who have hope, look to her. Keep your eyes on her, and clouds undulating above will answer the request of the unbelievable. Continue your everyday journey. To the sordid nightmare who tries to triumph over the fighter, you will never succeed. Retreat to whatever cavern you crawled out of. You will not stand a chance against her, for she will flick you off of her shoulder like the insignificant pest you are. There shall be no more scrimmages here. She has the power to redefine the impossible. Through abiding tenacity, the entirety of this brawl will be a glimpse of valor won fair and square, seen through the eyes of a warrior.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Dustin?
I have a kind of mythos I think on. It's a cross between Prometheus and Plato's cave, where you're out, you leave the cave, and you're perceiving the sun. You're looking at the sun, and sun representing truth. And it's kind of like it's the Blake poem where he says, "What hand dare seize the fire? I consider the fire truth." And in this poem, I'm discussing a kind of grasping the truth, and it's such a horrific and great and big thing that it's too much in the and so I have this poem called "At the Shifting." Once was too much. I held out my hand in thoughtlessness. My fingers slid through the fire, rough-shod, and burned like pulp in sorrow. Grief is unusual. In these times the heart palpitates, sinks, and feels dizzy. I light the candle, a symbol with the endless spectrum of color and size. My instant, a perfection, is night wound tight as a golden place. Passion enslaved me like a goon in a palace room. My mind, uneasy, lifts the veil quietly. At the silent shifting, delight. Daylight cuddles the false and the true.
And you said that was inspired by mythology.
Yeah, it's the Promethean myth of kind of like seeking the forbidden, and the forbidden is actually the full truth that, as Plato, he kind of uses a lot of symbolism to describe, that people have to live with their illusions. There are a lot of things, lies that people tell themselves, and in this poem I'm describing like grabbing the full truth and holding it and doing away with these illusions, and just how devastating that is to the person experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Agreed.
As I'm talking to you two and I'm hearing your poetry, I'm guessing that there are differences and similarities between the two of you that are very complementary in terms of working together on the journal and the press. You're not like two of the same. And I think that's really interesting and powerful, and I'm sure it enhances the work that you guys are doing.
It does. There are plenty of times where we bounce off of each other, and also there are certain times, even at a reading, when Dustin's reading his work, I close mine and say, "Yep, why bother?" but no, I mean over the years, I've come to find my own voice, and I have my own style, and I think it's wonderful that he and I are on different individual poetic paths, and our work certainly speaks to each other in certain ways. And if I hear it, I know that there's something wrong.
Well, for me, I've experienced a lot of traumatic things that most people haven't dealt with. I've had a very exciting and riveting life. I just recently had a poem published by Silver Birch Press about when I actually drowned. I had actually been drowned, and my aunt resuscitated me, and that was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And, speed up a little bit to when I was about 12, I was at Boy Scout camp, and a friend of mine, there was a river that had gone over its usual bounds because it had rained real heavy and was, very deep. And anyway, a friend of mine and I were walking along the banks, and he slipped and fell into the river. And I ran and I started to pull him out, and a couple of friends came out, and they had one of those, these big staffs that we all three held out, and he grabbed the staff and we pulled him out through that. And I describe things like that as like part of a karmic cycle. And I said, there's that old saying that, karma's only a bitch if you are. So, I have the fact of, a good deed was done for me, that I did a good deed for another to sort of equalize things. And I've had several of these types of experiences, and it just makes life more valuable and more precious to have an experience where you actually help someone continue their life when they're in danger.
Absolutely.
It's very, very exciting, and also very life affirming.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my work is. I'm a social worker, and my specialty is working with people who are at high risk of suicide or people who have lost loved ones to suicide. And you both have said some things that resonate with me so deeply, because my belief is that what suicide prevention is really about is giving people the ability to get to life worth living, not just staying alive, but life worth living. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I've had more than my fair share of suicidal moods, and I know exactly what happens. You start to feel that life has no purpose, or that you specifically are a burden to other people, or a lot of other things. And what I think is the big medicine is to define who you are and get that person out, and make yourself an active member of a community, or some kind of something positive that affirms your worth, as well as you're affirming someone else's worth.
Absolutely.
And change your perception of yourself to where you're not downing yourself or thinking life is useless, and look at life and say, look at what I have done, versus look at all these empty spaces of things I haven't done.
And that's where I see what you two, Dustin Pickering and ZM Wise, are doing, is that you're putting your work out there and you're putting other people's work out there. And that allows people to feel that connection and to know that they, it's like it tells you you're okay when you hear somebody else who has thoughts and experiences and feelings that you've had, but you've maybe not shared. So I believe so much in the healing power of art, both in creating it and being in the audience and connecting with people. So,
definitely.
As I said at the beginning, I talked about how, a lot of people with mental illness, and they struggle and struggle and struggle, but they can be very, very creative, and sometimes have a totally, a vision of things that is far beyond what our spectrum would be.
Right.
But
it's not an us and them thing. It really is we all. Yeah. Hey, you guys, we are at the end of our hour.
Ooh.
I can't believe it, but it's true. So I get to thank you both, ZM Wise and Dustin Pickering from Transcendent Zero Press. Thank you so much for spending this hour with me and our listeners. I will do my part to share ways to connect with you guys, and really appreciate you sharing yourselves on air, your poetry and the conversation. Thank you so
very much for